Welcome to the Momming Around podcast. I'm your host, Liz Mercedes, and this is a podcast by a mom, that's me, for moms, that's you. I hope you came to laugh today because we have a fellow infertilityer here with me, and we are ready to share our war stories. Here with me today, I have Benjamin's mom, Anna Boltyanskiy. Did I say that right? Did I say it right?
Yeah, that was great. Hi, thanks for having me.
Hi, thanks for being on. How are you this lovely day?
My kid woke me up at like 6, just chugging coffee.
Girl, my baby was such a good sleeper in the beginning, and I was like, oh, this is great. Like, I got a good sleeper. No. She was up at 3 a.m. and she hasn't gone back to sleep. She went back to sleep for like 2 half-hour quick little stints. And she's out there with my mom right now. My mom, bless her, is just trying to keep her entertained because she will not go back to sleep. It's so bad.
We had a good sleeper until he hit 2 recently, and then that all went away.
Oh, gosh, at 2 years old.
Yeah, so we got really spoiled for a while there.
Yeah. Oh, that's so tough. So we went to the same-ish fertility clinic, same company, same family. I didn't even ask about location, but we don't have to go into that. So tell me about your whole journey, how you even got there to begin with, because obviously they suggest that you are trying for about a year, but everybody's kind of, as I'm talking to people and realizing, is a little different about how they get there. So how did you get there?
Yeah, for sure. So I think we had denial for a while. And I also was just worried for even longer than a year. But basically, I got married at 24. It was totally not in my head that like I'd heard about fertility things, but it was not. I thought it only had to do with age. I just was so naive. I was just thinking, oh, everyone I know just had kids when they wanted to have kids, like totally within our control.
Yeah.
So wrong. And then, months went by and nothing was happening. And, I started to get worried, I think like 3 months in, which now seems a little ridiculous, but I was just like, what's happening? And then I think we did end up giving it a year, but it was just like a painful year already. Like I wasn't just like, oh, a year and then we'll worry. I'm like a worrier. So I was worrying from like 3 months in. And eventually my gynecologist like wasn't super helpful. She gave the great like, just don't stress. Yeah. Like
I hate
just chill out. I was like, it's just a glass of wine that I need, clearly.
Right.
So that was not helpful. When I realized that wasn't helpful, I eventually got past the denial, I think around a year in, and was like, oh, I want to just get checked out like by a fertility clinic. So we actually started out at Columbia because it was closer to where I was working. And so we started there and did like just some Clomid cycles and some IUIs. So it wasn't until IVF that we switched to Army, New Jersey.
Okay, nice. Yeah. And how was the Clomid for you? They never put me on Clomid, but I did do a couple IUIs, which IUIs are, looking back, weren't bad at all. How was the Clomid cycle for you?
Yeah, it wasn't like, none of it was physically so bad, but I actually think emotionally it was like more heart-wrenching than the IVF cycles. It's like really hard to, I think, get your head to be like, I'm ready for IVF. Like, it feels like a very big commitment.
Yeah, totally.
But I try to tell people, like, if you can skip the painful, like, emotional part of IUIs and Clomid, like, it's just, I found it excruciating because I felt like, I was like, oh, like, this is going to work. Yes. But it didn't up your chances by that much. And then it didn't work, and there was nothing to show for, like, that effort.
Right.
So I actually felt like that was probably the low emotionally. And once we switched to Army, New Jersey, I had, like, new hope, and I had like, it wasn't definitely the end of our story, but I just felt like it was like a shift emotionally where I was like, oh, like it's a very confident doctor and the stats are so different than with IUI.
Yeah, no, totally. And for IUI, we actually they put me on the lowest dose of medication, and my nurse, I had to switch nurses. Thank God I like switched, but she was horrendous. Like, she was like, you should go on shots for IUI. And I was like, did you say that or did the doctor say that? And she was like, no, I'm saying that. And I'm like, I really wouldn't want to go on shots right now if I don't have to. And she's like, well, you're going to have to do IVF and you're going to have to go on shots anyway. And I was like, yes, but is it going to make a difference for this round? So then I was like, can I speak to the doctor? And then the doctor ended up telling me that she would not suggest shots. And I was like, so why is your nurse suggesting shots? And that's when I was like, no, take the nurse away. Like, I need a new nurse. And then we got connected with this amazing, amazing nurse that I just loved so much. much. I was actually so sad when we got pregnant because I was like, that's it? I'm not going to talk to you anymore.
I had that too. Yeah. It's like so important to really like love your whole team.
Yes.
And I think like Colombia was a great place, but I didn't click the same way with like my team, my doctor and whatever. And I just I kept hearing that RMA New Jersey was just like the best of the best for like labs, which is so important for IVF.
Yes.
My doctor super recommended. I think sometimes you feel like you're stuck. Like, you know, we did 6 months basically between Clomid and IUI. So it just felt like forever.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes you just need like a fresh start. You're like, okay, you know, I just need like a breath of fresh air, like a new person, a new team, like try something new.
Totally. I think I shared that we did 2 egg retrievals and we only had 1 embryo. I've shared it on other episodes before, but we were kind of stuck in that, you know, this really isn't working. Like it doesn't seem like we don't know if we're ever going to be biological parents because it doesn't seem like it's going to work. And we couldn't reset because like my husband always say, we're at the best place. Like there's nowhere else that's going to be better. Like where are we going to go? So we did feel a little stuck in that sense just because we were having such a difficult time.
That definitely makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me about your decision to switch over to RMA. I know you touched on it just a tad, but
yeah, I had gotten connected, I think, at that point with some Jewish organizations that are like in this infertility space. So I think I got connected with like a counselor who's like, they're all volunteers, which is just amazing that they like spend their time. They get so committed to like your story and like rooting for you. The organization was Bonei Olam. And so they're just incredible. They also help fund IVF, which is amazing.
Oh, wow.
But even if they don't do that, they just help you as like an extra cheerleader supporter. And I just felt like confused about and really scared about IVF, but also just like, do we stay with Columbia? Do we go somewhere else? Which doctor? And just doing that research when you're already emotionally drained, physically drained, like it's just too much. So to have someone who is like outside of all this, she wasn't invested, like she doesn't care ultimately, you know, she's not working for any of these doctors, but she like had a wealth of knowledge over decades. And so she spent a few hours on the phone with me, like laying out all the different options in the New York area. And then ultimately just gave like a really, really strong recommendation for RMA New Jersey. And we were living in the city at the time, but we were basically, it all just felt right for what she was saying. So we decided to do one appointment with Dr. Ryback there. And we just like loved him. I just remember the first like meeting we had with him was the thing that gave hope for the first time, because he was just basically saying like, oh, so, and then when you want your second kid, you know, you'll just come back, blah, blah. And I was in this headspace that you just said, like, are we ever going to be parents? Like, is this in the cards for us? So to have someone be so kind of confident that, you know, oh, we can even talk about like down the road if you want other children, was like really amazing. And he just talked through the whole process, like let me know kind of, I think the unknown of IVF is very scary, but once he kind of explained and broke down what all the steps were, it was still intimidating, but I felt like hopeful that we had the right fit.
Yeah, totally. I love how you said the unknown of IVF can be really scary because that's so real. And I feel like unless you're really going through it, you don't know what you don't know, if that makes sense. Because, and especially because you can watch as many, I was the type of person that watched a million YouTube videos of people like going through it, but everybody's case is so individual. And so like your protocol or what you're expected to do, or even what your morning monitoring hours look like could be so different from somebody else. Do you want to talk about kind of like what you would tell someone who's going through IVF for the first time, what they can kind of expect? Obviously, like I said, everybody's experience is different.
Yeah, I've actually had the fortune, I guess you could say, but I guess I've been able to talk to a lot of friends who are either doing egg freezing since we've done IVF, or who are going through IVF for various genetic or fertility reasons. So I do feel like I kind of started getting into like a little spiel with them. But it's just, I guess, helpful to know that like, oh, I had this experience, but it's not just isolated. I can then talk to other people about it. It could help them. So what I usually sort of talk about is that, at least for me, I'm not like a person who is comfortable with new medications or shots, or like it wasn't casual. Like I was really freaking out. And I had some bad experiences like unrelated to IVF with like new medication and allergies. So I was just like, I don't know what I'm doing. But even with all of that, like regardless of that you're coming in with, I feel like you just get into a rhythm, like with anything, you kind kind of are able to, like, the first few nights of shots are like intimidating or scary, but then it becomes casual. It's like, okay, like my husband's gonna give me the shot and then we're gonna go out for dinner is where we got eventually. It was definitely still ups and downs with like the emotions and the hormones, but it became just like a part of our evening, thankfully. So, and then I guess the other thing I tried to remind myself and try to remind my friends is like, you could do anything for 2 weeks, like for the retrieval cycle, like however uncomfortable it is, but it's like time bound. 2 weeks, like you're getting closer to your goal, like with each day, and just sort of like keeping your eye on that like this is going to be done soon. So even if you're having whatever types of, hormonal reactions to the medication, it'll be over soon.
Yeah, I love that you say that. My husband just completed 75 Hard. I don't know if you're familiar with that program or whatever it is. So it's like 75, it's like a mental challenge, but it's like 75 days and he has to do like 2 workouts, 1 outside, 1 inside. He has to read 10 pages of a self-help book. He has to drink a gallon of water. I don't know. There's a bunch of different things that he has to do. And so originally I was going to do it with him. And then I was like, I just did like 4 parts. I'm like, I went through 2 egg retrievals. I had a pregnancy. I'm breastfeeding. Like, I don't need to prove to myself that I have mental resilience. Like, I have proven it time and time again.
For sure. Yeah, but it is this kind of like, you have to pump yourself up and like, yeah. And, we got into like cute little things like with our retrieval, we like, I don't know, it helped me I'm really into like taking photos, whatever, I don't know. And so we just would take like a photo each night that we were doing, like, so we would be like, night 1, 2, we would just like, say whatever night it was, with like show it with our fingers, whatever. And then it was like silly, but it was just something to just be like, whatever, this is not taking over, like, and this isn't all like, And then I like ended up, when my son was born, I probably when I was pregnant, before I had a newborn, I like made like an album for him, which he now can look at, because like as a toddler, he actually like sort of starts to get it. He's like, I want to see baby photos, whatever. But it's even before baby photos. It starts with like the whole story of how we were able to like bring him here, which started with all those shots. So I think it helped when it was like, just even then, like thinking like, okay, this is just this is the beginning, and hopefully it's part of this like, story that has a happy ending.
Totally. I talked about this on a previous episode with also an IVF mom, and it's just so cool how we have their first picture. Like that first, like that transfer picture. Well, we have them as an embryo before they're even in us because they show us the picture. And then they transfer and they show us that picture too. And we have all of that. And that's something that other people don't have.
For sure. Yeah. Like, yeah, just looking at like the little embryo picture and then looking at your kid now, you're like, how did that happen? It's really,
I know.
My husband and I really felt like, no one would choose like, let's go through IVF versus like other way. But I think there are certain things about it once you're in it that were like just so eye-opening. And I think it showed us so many miracles of like how a child gets to where they are. I think other people who don't go through it would just take it for granted. You get to your first ultrasound 8-10 weeks, like, and we've already seen our child for so long. And also we know like how much it took, how many perfect things had to line up. So just the whole miracle of how a child's created, I think, is just very apparent. And we're just like so much more appreciative, I think, like the whole pregnancy and then the whole, like even when he's, tantruming now.
Yes, totally. It completely changed my beliefs on certain things. And I was completely changed after that. Just seeing, exactly how you said, how like everything lines up. You talk about also how you kind of appreciate, him now, but did it contribute at all to your postpartum anxiety and depression? Because I feel like I had an especially difficult pregnancy mentally because, you wait to get to all those milestones and the stakes are so high, I feel like, when you go through IVF. And then I feel like that translated into my postpartum anxiety and depression. And I know that you said you had it too. So do you feel like that kind of contributed to it?
Yeah, I feel like the postpartum anxiety depression caught me like really off guard again, just like the fertility thing did. I knew about it, like, oh, it can happen, but I wasn't even thinking about postpartum, which maybe it was crazy. I was just like, thankfully, I loved my pregnancy and I was really enjoying the pregnancy. I felt good. I didn't have many physical symptoms and I didn't have much anxiety while pregnant. My husband did. My husband felt like because it was like not happening to him, he didn't have as many like signals about like, oh, is everything fine, whatever. But I think I was sort of like, it took me so long to get here, right? I think overall our journey took us like 3 years. So by the time that we are like expecting, I was just like, whatever happens, I know nothing's guaranteed. I've learned that, but I think I was able to table the nervous thoughts. Like the first trimester for sure, we were just waiting for the other shoe to drop, or like, this can't be working. Nothing's worked.
Yeah.
But once we got past that, I was like, I'm just going to enjoy this because like, this is what I've wanted for so long. And so I thankfully loved being pregnant, but the issue came once he was born. I guess the hormonal drop was just so super big, and I'm very sensitive to that. So that was a part of it. And then my anxiety, like my sticky thoughts and my kind of like, eventually it led to not being able to sleep. Like all of that for me was about like, not about the baby. I was like, oh, he's fine. Like somehow I was like, he's got this. It was more like, am I being a good mom? Whatever that means. Like, am I doing enough? Like, am I whatever? And so that's like where I got kind of like cyclical. And then it was just confusing because it would be like one day anxiety, one day depression, just like ups and downs. And it took a while for me to like figure out what to do about it. So, and then I did hear once I started going to different support groups and things like that, that for IVF moms and for moms on any kind of fertility journey, the rates of postpartum mood things are much higher. And I kind of wish someone had told me about that or like flagged it. I guess you don't want to like plant it in people's heads that that could happen to you, but just awareness, it was just totally caught me off guard. And I think I felt guiltier because I was like, oh, I wanted this baby for so long. And it's like not what I expected. And like, this is so hard. And I don't know what I'm doing. And I'm so like anxious about my role. And like, this isn't what I was dreaming of. Like the pregnancy was, that fulfilled my expectations. But this, I'm like, what's going on here?
Yeah, no, totally. I totally get that I was like, this is exactly what I wanted. Why am I feeling like this? But yeah, totally. And then, so then you finally got some help through support groups, or is that what really helped you?
Yeah, I think it was like a mix of things. I was connected through my OBGYN to the Motherhood Center in New York, and they are really great. And they have support groups like online they can also connect you to like a psychiatrist or a psychologist that specializes in postpartum issues. But then they also just do these support groups that are like $25 a session or something like that with like a licensed psychologist. So I felt like that was my initial step, was the support groups. And that was really helpful because everyone who was joining that group, they were not the moms who were like, oh, I saw my baby, love at first sight, everything was perfect, the breastfeeding happened instantly, I'm in love, like blah, blah, which like I know happens. Some people love the newborn phase and it clicks and that's amazing, but I needed to hear the like, oh, I'm with you, like I don't know what's going on with my head right now, like, I don't know what my life is, I'm trying to figure this out. So definitely hearing other people's experiences was helpful. Ultimately wasn't enough. I was then connected to a psychiatrist through the Motherhood Center, and it wasn't until I started like a low dose of Lexapro that everything changed. And it was like, and I just like, not immediately, it took a few weeks, but once it kicked in, I was like, oh, okay. And I only started that when he was like 3.5, 4 months old. I really wish I wasn't so hesitant because I'd never had any experience with medications for mental health things. And so I was just so worried about it. And now I'm just like a big proponent of like, if all these other things are not working, like do not like deprive yourself of this super helpful tool.
Totally. I totally agree with that, especially if you feel like it's kind of robbing you from motherhood. I mean, I am a big advocate for, I hate the newborn phase, so it's okay if you hate the newborn phase. But I feel like after like 2.5 months, I was like, oh, this is great. I like being a mom. Obviously, like I still had that anxiety. It wasn't as bad, but I think that you're right. If you've exhausted all your options and medication's going to help you be more present, then absolutely do it.
Yeah. And for me, it really like, got to a point where I was really having trouble like functioning. So I just realized like, all these things like therapy. I had a therapist beforehand to help me through fertility issues, and she's great, but like that just, it wasn't enough because like if my hormones were all over the place, like it wasn't landing anywhere because I was just not able to like process. So I realized it was just more of a physical thing. And, if we have a headache, we'll take Advil. Like, why is this such a big mental block to be like, oh, I need medication for this other thing that's also like physical, And for me, it really like what was so clear to me that I just needed that extra bit of help was that I just like couldn't sleep at night. And it had nothing to do with my baby not sleeping. Like he had learned to sleep, and other people would maybe be taking shifts with him. And I would just like wake up in the middle of the night and just be like in just this sticky thoughts, whatever. And I couldn't sleep for like 3 hours, 4 hours with that kind of anxiety. And I just had never had that before. So I
Yeah.
was just basically like, I need to give this a try.
Yeah.
And yeah. And I also just remember being like, why is this happening? Because I was like, I already did the fertility journey. I paid my dues. Like,
Yeah.
why? I really was very bitter that I couldn't like enjoy him, and it felt like so long. But really, I think it was just, another opportunity, like eye-opening thing of like, look, people deal with this, and like
Yes.
you can get through this, and you can just reach out for help that
Yeah.
never had experience with before. So
Yeah.
yeah, it was definitely like, that was probably the most challenging thing. And I went back to work at 10 weeks
Okay.
postpartum, which was also very challenging and
Yeah.
didn't help this whole situation. And I also think I was at my low. I had basically, I think I started the first dose of Lexapro the day I went back to work. So I
Okay.
just remember like sitting at my computer and like the words not making sense on the screen. My
Yeah.
heart's like pounding. It's like, how am I going to do this? Like, I actually thought, like, do I need to leave my job? Like, it was like truly a crazy time. But thankfully, like, little by little, having the village supporting you as a mom also,
Yeah.
not just your child. And yeah, having like the right professionals around you made all the difference,
Yeah. Totally. I love that you say that like it's like taking Tylenol for a headache, because like it's so true. And also that like you could have all the talk therapy in the world at that point, but nothing's landing. And like I remember being in that mind space at the time, and I could reason with, like, I could say this doesn't make sense reasonably. And I remember having this conversation with my husband. I'm like, but I can't get the thoughts to stop. And I would say, I don't want to be like this. I cannot get these thoughts to stop. So yeah, what you're saying just makes so much sense.
100%. I felt like I was like a broken record. My poor husband, I would just, and I'm the kind of person who like processes things by sharing them. But so I was truly a broken record on this one point of like, am I a good mom? Am I doing enough? Like, which is, I mean, whatever, just a bizarre concept that our society is anyway like put on us. But just like, and my husband would be like, we had this conversation like 10 times today,
Yes.
He was so patient with me, but it was really challenging because that was the only thing on my mind for sure. And just to get that unstuck was the whole thing.
For me, it was, is she safe? Is she breathing? I would ask everyone multiple times a day, is she breathing? Is she breathing? Is she breathing? And the thing that really saved me in those early days was we were going to buy an outlet, and someone said, oh, I actually have an outlet that I never used. Do you want it? And I was like, yes, please. And then like, I didn't have to say out loud, is she breathing? I would just check like her oxygen. I'd be like, okay, she's good. Okay, she's good. But like, it was like, my mom stayed with me for 2 months because she saw how bad it was. And my husband was just like, he was not super patient. I mean, he tried to be, but he was just like, it eats at you, if someone's like constantly asking you the same thing over and over again. That doesn't really make rational sense. Like, obviously she's breathing, she's a healthy baby, there's nothing wrong with her, but it was just constant. I just couldn't get that thought out of my head.
100%. And I think also for my husband, like, as I said, he had a lot of anxiety while I was pregnant, but then once he saw the baby and he was like, oh, like, I can see that he's okay, like, I have visual cues now from him and I can connect with him and blah, blah, blah. He was like the love at first sight, which again helps when you haven't just had like a surgery. I had a C-section, you're not recovering from whatever labor you had, and you're not crazy hormonal and blah blah blah, but like, he was just like, he felt like a father right away. He loved it. He was just like, so it was even harder for him because he was like, what do you mean, like, this is the best thing ever, and I had like this thought for a while where I was like, I kind of wish I was pregnant again. Like, it was this bizarre, I don't know if you had that, but it was this like, I liked that, like, I felt so connected to him and he was just mine, and I like, he was safe in there, and I knew I was doing whatever I needed to as a mom because my body was handling it, and it wasn't until like, now we're just like trying to both survive in this reality that it felt like less safe in some way. So it is interesting when you have like a totally different experience than your spouse and they're brought down by your emotions and all of that. For sure, it was very challenging. But my parents and my husband were just like incredible. They were like a team, and they were just like, you're gonna get through this. And when I started saying like, should I quit my job, which I'm just like, was the last thing, I've never thought that in my entire life. And it was just, that was how bad it was. They were like, you just have to push through, and they convinced me to just try the medication, and they just really saved me and got me through all of this. And like, my husband was basically like my son's mom and dad during those like whatever 4 months when I was super out of it. So no, he was really great about it, but it is challenging when you're like not at all seeing the same thing. It's a completely different experience. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. I do hear a lot that people after they have the baby, they feel like, oh, I can't keep them safe anymore. Like they're not inside me anymore. I actually went the other way. I was like, oh, pressure's off. Like my work's done. I made her. She's out here. She's healthy. I was like, great. Now I can share the responsibility with everyone. And that's where my mind went. But yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit about your birth story? I love birth stories. I love hearing birth stories. So I always ask everyone about their birth story on here.
I think it's all actually pretty related, once you try to think through your whole like trajectory from infertility, but basically I went to my 40-week like regular checkup appointment. Everything been going fine. And, I'm pretty much like, please command me. Like for the 2 weeks before that, I was like, okay, I'm like ready. Why are you not ready? And they told me, the doctor said that I had like low water. So I hadn't like felt my water break or anything, but I guess sometimes they say it's like more of a leak than a break. And so it's like unclear, but they said it's sort of dangerously low. It had gotten to a point where like steadily over a few weeks, it was too low. So they said, we really recommend that you get induced like today. And I was like, whoa, like I came to this appointment just thinking as a checkup, like now you're like telling me to go to the hospital. Fine. So we went home, and I mean, they gave us the choice. They're like, are you okay with that? But I think at the time I didn't know as much about like and whatever. And I was like, I'm so ready for this baby to come. Like, yes, I'm excited. Great. So we went home and like super calmly like packed the remainder of our stuff, like had a meal together. Like it was a totally bizarre, not how I expected to like be going to the hospital. Yeah. And we like show up to the hospital like giddy, like little, kids that are like, oh my God, we're about to have a baby. And everyone, like all the other women there are like in horrible pain from contractions and stuff. So it's just this crazy, like, situation. But then, and then I remember they got me to the room and they like gave me this giant meal. Like it was like a steak and like all this stuff. I was like, what's going on? They're like, you're gonna eat for a while. So enjoy. And like no one was in a rush because it was just like, oh, you came in at 7. We're gonna like induce you at 10. It was just like not what I thought was gonna happen. So that was all like great and fine. But then as we were, I guess before we did the induction, they were like, before we started, they were like, let's do, if you want the epidural, like let's do this now because the Pitocin's gonna be like a whole thing to deal with. So as I mentioned to you before we started, they took like 3 epidurals and that was like really challenging. I had my husband and my mom there and they were like holding my hand, and the whole process of like, he was a resident trying to get the epidural in. It was such a mess. They were like not able to get it in, and like it was like weird sensations throughout my body the whole time. And then it would like not work. Like they couldn't push the medication through, so they had to do it again. I don't even remember all the issues with it, but it took 3 tries. Oh my gosh. It was not fun. And then even with those 3 tries, I still had like one place in my body, like near my hip, where I felt like all the contraction. So they were just, it was like all that concentrated pain in like one spot. So I'm so grateful that it worked overall. Some people it like won't or whatever. I guess they said it was like something with like they say some people's bodies are like aligned in such a way that like there will be certain pockets it won't hit. So whatever, that was what it was. And then, we just were like waiting. I feel like the induction game was just like waiting. I also didn't really, because I got the epidural right away, I was just like in bed the whole time, like not really able to like move. So I didn't feel like I was really so involved. I was just trying to see, like, wasn't feeling most of the contractions, just trying to see what would happen. And we had like a scare in the middle of the night because, they're monitoring your baby, and he like wasn't handling one of my contractions. It was like a really long one. And so like 20 people came in the room, and like it was this whole like emergency thing. I thought they were going to like whisk me away at that point to a C-section. Thankfully, they just kept like flipping me around and around until we got to a position where he was okay. But it just shows you like how little control you have of like anything, right? I was just like praying that everything would be okay, and you can't do anything at all. No. Like, I don't know what's going on. But then my doctors were great because they didn't freak out after that and say, you have to go get your C-section. I then continued to labor for like, that must have been like 4 a.m. And at 4 p.m. They were like, it's still your choice. You could keep going. But I'd only gotten to 5 centimeters. And he had not descended like at all. Like he was just like, I'm not ready. I'm comfortable. So they're like, you could keep doing this, but it's just not clear that it's going to get anywhere. And, he was occasionally having trouble tolerating it. I was just like getting really annoyed with feeling that sharp pain every like whatever minute, like in one spot. So I think I got to a point where I was like, okay, I like gave it my best shot, and then we like opted for the C-section at that point. So I mean, it wasn't like ideal. I'm hoping in the future that I could, have like a VBAC, or like knowing what I know now, that I could try to avoid an induction unless it's like absolutely necessary, because I don't think my body was like so ready. But nothing like too crazy. crazy. Thank God he came healthy. And I had like crazy anemia after, which probably didn't help with my whole postpartum. Like I lost a lot
Yeah.
of blood and blah, blah, blah.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, thankfully the recovery wasn't as bad physically. I think most of it was like emotional.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. I had a similar experience. They induced me at 39 weeks because my doctor said she doesn't like to go over 40 weeks with an IVF baby. Um, so they induced me, and it was similar in the fact that they induced me, but then I ended up laboring, and then once I was like not progressing. They gave me 2 doses of Cytotec. Her heart rate, the first dose of Cytotec kept going down. They couldn't figure out why. So then the nurse talked to me about a C-section, if I would be open to that. And I'm like, however, like she can come out safely. And then after the second dose, my body was just like, all right, we're ready. And it started laboring. And then they didn't want to give me Pitocin because I wasn't taking the epidural, and that was going to make the contractions really intense. So after I took the epidural, they literally, my chart says a drop. They give me a drop of Pitocin. And I know that because the lactation consultant's like, what's a drop of Pitocin mean? I'm like, I don't know. I didn't put it on my chart. And then once they gave me that drop of Pitocin, literally it was like a half an hour later, and they were like, okay, you're ready to push. And I was like, oh, okay.
It's amazing. Yeah, it's good to know that like inductions definitely can work. I guess it just depends like when it, like, you know, at what point, like where's your body, where's your baby.
Exactly. And exactly what you said, like your body just wasn't ready. And I think that sometimes that's the case. And then sometimes like that baby is ready. They just need that little push to come out.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I do remember having also like all these feelings of like, okay, I needed all this intervention to like get this baby in there.
Yeah.
Now I need all this intervention to get the baby out. Like it definitely added to whatever my mental state was after, because I was like, why can't my body do this? Which was like a skewed perspective, because like, look, your body grew this incredible baby, and like you had an uncomplicated pregnancy, and like IVF worked, and there were so many miracles that did happen. But I think I got so fixated on like, wow, why is all this like artificial, so to speak, which is just whatever, like not a term I like now, but at the time was like a big thing. And then I think also because of the C-section and the recovery and like a bunch of other things, like I had a really hard time with breastfeeding. So I ended up like pumping. But I think that also is like such an emotional decision, like how to feed your baby. And if like, I never was like, oh, breastfeeding will 100% work for me, because a lot of people in my family, a lot of the women like weren't able to for whatever reason. But I was just like, I want to give it a shot, etc. And so it was surprising how much guilt came with this, like idea that like, okay, this also didn't work, and like I have to now pump, which also feels artificial, because it's like, oh, you know, I'm trying to get this milk out, and then it's doubling the time, and then I'm feeding the baby. And I think that also was like made the postpartum thing really difficult, because I was like tied to the pump and not able to be with my baby during that. Then somebody else would like feed, because either at the same time to save time, or like if I was, then it was like this crazy juggling act.
Yes. Yeah, you make a really good point. I'm also exclusively pumping, but I'm exclusively pumping, like I'm not breastfeeding her anymore. I was doing like a morning feed back like 2 months in, but now like she just gets pumped milk and she gets formula because I don't make enough milk. But yeah, it does feel like, oh, this is another thing that didn't work. But like you said, like my mom always said, like I didn't have milk. And so I worked really hard to get any supply. And so I should feel proud of what I've done. But sometimes, especially when it's just me and her at home, it just feels like I really took the difficult road here, where I'm like trying to juggle her and pumping and everything. And it's, like you said, it's very difficult.
And it cuts into that, like any amount of rest that you could possibly get, because like in between, right, then like one feed and the other, you're just like pumping and washing the pump parts, and you're just like, what's going on? You know, you don't have like time for yourself, especially early on. Once the stretches get longer, you know, it gets easier. And I think it's all like related. Like for me, because I wasn't feeling well and I needed to switch over to medication, and I was going back to work so early, I realized that like pumping was not doing such a great job for my mental health. And like my baby needed to just like have a healthy, happy mom. And part of that for me was like to stop pumping. And that was a really tough decision also, but it just wasn't like, it was like an extra thing that was just like not helping me get back to like myself. And I think we were nervous, which was just like not true at this point, but like we were nervous that like starting that kind of medication and would it get in the breast milk? Like thankfully that's all safe for breastfeeding and everything. But I guess we just like made the decision to cut out that extra variable. We switched to formula at like 2.5 months. And the crazy thing is that's when like the formula shortage was announced like the
Oh
day after I stopped
no.
pumping. And I was like, if I knew that, I would for sure just like avoid that stress and keep pumping for however long, you know? So
Yeah.
that was an added like crazy, like, oh my gosh, how can I make that decision?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's also hard. And then now, you know, thank God my kid is 2 and like they're all eating the same junk food in
Yeah.
daycare. And like it truly, nobody ever asks again, like, oh, how were they fed in the first like year of their life or like 6 months? And like, as long as they're healthy and happy and getting those nutrients, like it's all fine. And I just
Yeah.
hope that going forward, you know, if we're able to have, you know, more children go our family, that I could just like go with the flow more of just like however it happens is totally fine. But it's such a emotional moment, like right
Yeah.
after birth.
And also, I think like making the decision to stop, it's very emotional and it's so brave because I've had so many days. I mean, now I'm kind of in like the flow of pumping where I'm like, okay, like I don't love it, obviously, but I'm like, I've gotten kind of used to it. So it's not that bad. But so many days in the beginning, I think I should have stopped because I would have just been in a better mental space. But I wasn't brave enough to stop because I was like, okay, like if she gets sick, I'm going to like be like, oh, freaking out. I mean, she's going to get sick no matter what at some point, right? But if I can't give her breast milk, I'm going to freak out about that. Now I'm like, oh, like if something happens and there is no, I don't consider myself to have postpartum anxiety anymore. But when I start talking and reasoning about things, like maybe because like there's no shortage of formula on the horizon. But I'm like, if I stop pumping and she's not fully on solid food and there's a shortage in formula, then I'll freak out. And I'm like, I have a stash of like 12 formulas in my pantry. Like, what am I doing?
It's just so stressful. Yeah, actually, to that point about like, I never thought of it as like a brave decision. I was like, am I being selfish or whatever? But then I was going back to work. I was clerking at the time with a judge, and she was just like incredible, like in terms of being like a mentor and just so open about her own like, you know, pregnancies and etc. And she told me like she'd make any kind of accommodation for sure for like if I wanted to pump at work when I was going back. So we were having that conversation, and then I ended up updating her, and I was like, actually, I had stopped pumping. And she was like, congratulations, like that's huge. And I had like, it was like such a nice like thing to say, but I didn't think of it as like a milestone or something positive. I was like, oh, like I didn't survive long enough in this road, you know? So it was just a really helpful like shift of perspective where she was like, that's like a big deal. And you're like, you know, getting back to yourself in some way, you're getting your body back more. And, you know, the other thing that did help, I think my husband was very anxious about like weight gain for our son. He was never like big. And also like just, you know, I think it's like everything, I am a big believer in the like everything happens for a reason and everything's the best thing that like needs to be for your family and your kid. And ultimately for us, pumping and formula allowed us to know like exactly how many ounces he was getting, how much did he drink. Maybe, you know, it was like anxiety around that because it was like, oh, like did he have enough, blah, blah, blah. But I think for us, it was what we maybe needed as a family to just have that.
We did the same thing with I did the same thing with pumping. And that's why I stopped breastfeeding even in the morning, was because I needed to know exactly how much she was getting. Because same, she like lost weight. And it's normal for babies to lose weight at first, but with my anxiety plus that, it was too much. And so I needed to see how much she was getting. And then she was having like meltdowns, and I didn't want to have to blame, you know, her nutrition about the meltdown. So yeah, that's why we exclusively pumped.
I think it's also like, it does allow other people in your circle, whoever it is, your spouse or your mom or whoever's around, to like also be involved in feeding, which is like a really special like moment, and also helps a lot when you're not the only one. Like, you know, my husband, I would like his like way of trying to help me try to feel better. I like really like to, you know, go out, like go on dates with him, like do things. So I think he wanted me to feel like you could still do that. So kind of very early on postpartum, we had like such a village supporting us. We were so blessed with that, like in-laws, parents, like just everyone, grandparents of mine. So, you know, there were always people who could watch him, and because I could just pump the milk or give formula, we had that extra flexibility. So he would like really drag me out of the house and just be like, look, we can still do things and we can still like, you know, enjoy and etc. But it's like, it does have all those benefits of like helping other people bond with your kid. And then something I had to learn, but like, you know, accepting help is just such a lifesaver. And it's not, you're not a bad mom, which was my whole thing, because other people are helping. Actually, like we need that village, and like it's just crucial to say yes and rely on any help you're getting.
Yeah, definitely. I love how you said everything happens for a reason. I feel like that's something you hear a lot when you're going through IVF. And personally, I did not like that advice, if you could call it that, because it just felt like a slap in the face because why isn't this happening for me? And I don't know if I'm going to be able to be a biological parent. However, I did say on a previous episode, and I do stick with this, once everything works out, you kind of look at your baby and you look at your family and you're like, this is exactly how everything was supposed to be. So do you want to tell us a little bit about your IVF journey? I know we touched on it a tad, but I don't think we really got into the nitty-gritty of it.
Oh yeah. So we once we switched to RMA New Jersey, we did all the like background testing. We had unexplained infertility, which is like, I guess, good and bad. It's like, well, it's no one's fault, but no one knows what's going on. So I think we had to lean into that and just be like, this is outside our control. We may never get an answer. Like, this is up to God, and fine. Like, that's all, we can do with it. And so we did a retrieval, and it thankfully went really, really well. And that was the first thing that went well in this whole journey. And that's sort of what I mean by like the emotional labor of like IUI or Clomid. It either works or it doesn't, and it didn't. So it just feels like another slap in the face kind of. But then with retrieval, you wake up and they say you have X number of eggs. You're already like, there's something, like there's a hope that is all like potential for something. So we thankfully got a good number of eggs that tested well. We did like genetic testing. And so that already just eased my anxiety. I was like, I don't know if a transfer of these will ever work, but I was just like, thankfully we did one retrieval, which was such an amazing thing. I knew a lot of people who had to do so many, and I went into it being like, I might have to do a bunch. So then I was like, okay, great. Like that's the hard part, so to speak, because like, retrieval, more of you're like under some anesthesia. For transfer, you're not. Like I was like, okay, we could like, we're at least halfway there, if not more. So I was feeling pretty good. But there's always bumps in the road, and there's always, everything takes longer than you think with this process, and there's just unexpected things. So I think a big low for us was before transfer, my doctor wanted to check that everything looked good. So I think he did like a saline sonogram, I think it was. Yep. And that was the first indication that we had like something that was like a concrete issue. So he found like a bunch of polyps, like they were just all over the place. And he was like, this is really good that we saw this, because transfer would definitely not work on this kind of in this environment. So he's like, we got to deal with this. And he's like, it's a very simple surgery. We're just going to do a hysteroscopy. They're going to remove the polyps. Fine. So we go to do that, and I am like, okay, I'm bummed because I thought we could just go from retrieval straight to transfer, but I was like, fine, it's going to be okay. And this was like ended up being the most dramatic part of our story and like the biggest low, because I woke up from that surgery to like my tongue being completely numb, and I like asked what's going on, and I was like, I'm not feeling well, and they said that the surgery just failed on like a number of levels, which I never like. They were like, we didn't remove any polyps. I was like, okay, what? And they're like, also you had a crazy weird reaction to the anesthesia, and you like started like waking up, and you like bit your tongue, and then we pushed this like medication, and you went back like to get you back to sleep, and the whole thing, you're like waking up from surgery, you're like a little groggy, and that's just the last thing you want to hear. You're like,
do you remember any of it?
No, thankfully. I do know some people who like had woken up in the middle of their retreat, like something crazy, but thankfully I like don't have a memory of it. But the other part of it that was really scary was like I also couldn't, because I was out the whole time, I didn't know what had happened, and I was trying to piece together this puzzle. It was like solving a mystery. Like I was talking to this anesthesiologist, my doctor, like the surgeon, just all these people, and it was so confusing trying to figure out what was going on. And they gave me the medication that they pushed so that I would go like back to sleep, was a muscle relaxant, and I ended up, I don't know if they pushed too much of it or I had a weird reaction to it, I don't know, but I ended up having like such bad like pain after for like 2-3 days while it was wearing off, like this muscle relaxant thing. Anytime I like moved literally like an inch, I just felt like pain throughout my body, like it was like a spasm of some kind. So I like could barely move, like I was just like lying there. And so I was in like the worst of like physical and emotional places, because I was like, okay, this was all for nothing because I have to do this again. So we didn't get anywhere like in terms of closer transfer. Also, like if this didn't work, is it ever gonna work? Like was this something with my body that like, it turned out I had like cervical stenosis on top of whatever happened with the, so I think that basically they were saying like my cervix was like spasming or something, and so they
Okay.
couldn't get in there in order to do the polyp removal
Mm-hmm.
separate and apart, because I think the anesthesia stuff happened towards the end.
Mm-hmm.
But even before that, they just couldn't, the doctors couldn't get in there to get the polyps out. So it was just like all really crazy. And it was right before Passover. So my husband's like trying to prep our house for that and like is doing all the cleaning. And I'm just like totally useless, like, cause I
Yeah.
cannot move. And so that was really, truly miserable. And then, we had to figure out how to go from there. And I also was like psychologically pretty traumatized from that experience.
Totally.
So the idea of like going and doing that surgery again, I needed to make sure that like there were things that were different. So I actually
Yeah.
switched up the anesthesiologist and the surgeon. They squeezed me in with their top surgeon, which made me feel better. And I met with him. We talked through it through a friend. One of my best friend's moms is an anesthesiologist. Through her network, we like found the top anesthesiologist at the place that Army works with. And like, so I felt like I had a brand new team again, like the importance of like trusting your team and having that best team in place. And I just did a lot of like therapy sessions in advance of the second hysteroscopy, because I was just like, I really, need to get to a place, like, I don't know, I never really meditated, but I did all these like medical related meditations. There are ones before a procedure that like try to calm you down.
Yeah.
And I was just hoping for the best, but that was really a big low. And I remember my doctor, Dr. Reback, calling me. He was so kind to like spend a lot of time trying to figure this out with me, even though this wasn't like his area. This is like the surgical department.
Right.
But he called me. And so he's also a Jewish doctor. So I always felt like we had more of that. Like he would always like pray before he would like look in the ultrasound. And he was very like, oh, this isn't me. This is like, I'm just the messenger. I'm just working for the higher ups. So I always loved that perspective. And he ended up saying something really nice. It's like a phrase called Gamzula Tova, which means everything is for the good. And it is like a tricky thing because like you were saying, that's what like reminded me when you say like everything happens for a reason. When someone's going through like the worst thing, it's like really hard to accept it at that moment.
Totally.
But he seemed to say it with this like conviction and this again like hope for like this is ultimately somehow for the best. Like we don't know why, it doesn't make sense. Like we're not meant to know why, but it is gonna work out. Like he just had this like, and it has to be for the best. That's just like a fundamental belief that we have. And so it kind of grounded me, and I kept it's like a mantra almost that I kept trying to come back to.
Yeah.
But yeah, and thankfully we did the second hysteroscopy, and that one was incredibly smooth. There were like no issues with the anesthesia or with the surgical aspect. They went in. It was as simple as it was supposed to be. They took out the polyps. So who knows why we needed another roadblock, but it definitely added steps to an otherwise not crazy complicated IVF journey.
Yeah.
So that was like a whole thing. But once we got through those hysteroscopies, I was like, okay, I feel like my body's in like the best place. Let's see. And we transferred in June of 2020. So like, I guess our retrieval was like February. So it wasn't ultimately, it was like, 5 months or something, 4 or 5 months, but felt like a lifetime.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Every month feels like a lifetime when you're in it. And then thankfully the transfer worked too. So ultimately it was like I'm just so grateful that both the retrieval and transfer worked from the get-go. And that's just not something to take for granted because it could take so many tries and everything. But so thankfully after that, it was all smooth from there, but there's always something.
Totally. So you mentioned your religion a little bit. I know we talked a little bit about this before we started recording, how your husband kind of played a role and you coming back to religion. So do you want to just kind of talk about that?
Yeah, sure. So I met my husband at like a Shabbat dinner in college. I was in college and he was in grad school. And I'd always like joked with my parents, like, oh, I'm going to go to these like Shabbat dinners, me and my husband. But like, I didn't think it would actually happen. And then, we like both speak Russian. We're of like Russian background. So we somehow started speaking Russian. We connected. But he was like already wearing a kippah, I think, at the time. And once we started talking and whatever, I realized that he was basically like keeping the Jewish Sabbath, and he knew he wanted to, even if he wasn't already, he wanted to keep kosher. And so he had all of these, like, he was pretty firm and like, this is kind of what I want. So if you want to date me, like, this is sort of what you're, this is what you get. We dated for a while, but in that time, I basically was just like, well, he's a really great guy and he's just so, different and special. I really wanted to give it a shot, even though it was such a big, like, life change.
Yeah.
And at that point, I mean, I grew up like Reform Jewish. And at that point, I had done a few like trips to Israel and different things, but I hadn't really like thought about making such a big life change. But just over the course of like 3 years, especially when we were like long distance, I had to like make it my own. And I wasn't like doing it for him. He was the catalyst, but I had to make sure that I could see this like being a part of my life and that it would make me happy. And so once I did, thankfully, we were able to get to enough of like the same place to get engaged and all that. But it was like a slow journey over many years. Still is, I guess. And no, I'm really happy that we went down that path, but it definitely was like very crazy also for everyone at the time who like knew me and everything. Also in college, like, oh, sorry, can't go out with you Friday night, but see you Saturday night. Like, it was just definitely a big change to take on. But I think our faith has really helped us throughout all of these challenges, and our community and like the Jewish organizations I've mentioned. It really makes you feel like you're not alone and this isn't just our problem. People really hold you up. So
yeah, that's so important. Yeah, definitely. I love that. I love anyone going back to any religion. I know that like not everyone feels that way, but I just think that, or not going back, but just standing firm in like whatever faith that really calls to them. Because I just think that, like you said, like faith is like so important in the fact that it just grounds you and it kind of makes you feel like that stability, especially in hard times. And I just think it's so important.
Yeah, for sure. And I think like a big thing people do tend to experience once they first enter the infertility world and the like IVF world in particular is this feeling of being alone. And so it took me some time to like find the right kind of like organizations and things I connected with and whatever, and to really feel like, oh, there's like a lot of people going through this. This is common. And a lot of these Jewish organizations were part of it. But then I also felt like at some point during it, I think it was like also just talking to women who were on the other end of it, who were like of similar background to me, and then who had like basically who already have like a kid or two, but and it's like the light at the end of the tunnel, this can work.
Totally.
I felt very strongly that my husband and I both did, that we really wanted to share our fertility journey with whoever, like just to be a resource afterwards and during and etc. And similar also with postpartum, I was just like, these are taboo things, especially in the Jewish community. It's getting better, but people don't talk about it. Thankfully, people really want to have big families in the Jewish community, but it's just assumed that like it just happens, like boom, like it's just easy, and people have kids like close together, big families. So if that's not working for you, you're invited to all of these events around children's things every holiday. Like children are the core of probably a lot of religions, but in the Jewish religion, it's all about the children. And I just remember how painful it was to not be able to partake in the same way and to have those thoughts of like, will I ever? And so really connecting to other Jewish religious women who were dealing with this was so helpful. So I had like started a little WhatsApp group that connected all of us. Like it wasn't that many people, it was maybe 15, 20 people, but we were sort of going through it together. I met one of the girls at one point, we were both in it, and like, thank God we now both have kids, but just like women supporting women is so beautiful. And I just wanted to create a space that was in particular with like the type of lifestyle we're living in, the type of communities we're living in, that we get it even more so. And so I did that for fertility and for postpartum. And thankfully, I guess the groups are sort of like quiet now. I think thankfully most people have had kids or whatever it is, but if anyone ever joins, and it's always a space that is willing to, is very, people are very excited to share and be helpful.
Yeah. You made so many good points. One, I also shared my fertility journey on Instagram extensively. And I feel like through that, and I've talked about it before, I've had so many women reach out to me that are going through it, know someone who's going through it, have had multiple miscarriages and just have never really shared. And, you build that little like outlet for them just by you sharing. So they're allowed to, or they feel comfortable enough to share with you. I remember just kind of walking people through, their IUIs, their IVFs. And then when they finally announce, I'm like, yay, like it's great. I'm so happy for you. But yeah, so totally there. And then also how painful it is to kind of have child-centered things. When we started trying a little bit after all of our friends. We just weren't in a position where we were ready while they were trying. And I remember my husband looking at me once everyone kind of started announcing they were pregnant around the same time. And he's like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "Yeah." I was like, "We talked about like another year. We've always talked about it." And that's kind of where I feel comfortable being, obviously not knowing that we would have fertility issues. But so all of our friends kind of had babies around the same time. And in our mind, we would have the baby the next year. And it took us 3 years to have a baby. And so during that time, there were baby showers, there were christenings, there were birthday parties, there were all these things that were just way too painful for me to go to. And I feel like a lot of people, except for my like really close knit friends, a lot of people felt like that was me pulling away from them and just didn't really understand that that was something that was just too painful for me to go to and for me to face at the time.
Yeah, I guess like when we were in like the thick of our journey, at least for part of it, it was COVID, and
Okay.
one of the only benefits of that was that a lot of these events were virtual, and so
Mhm.
all these like virtual bris things, like circumcisions and things like
Mhm.
that, where it was like the only thing that made it a little bit more palatable for me was like I could just turn off my video, cry for a little bit, and like
Mhm.
didn't have to like fake a smile, because it is like hard. You don't want to come to an event. You are happy for your friends, but it is painful for you as well. And so that balance was always like really hard. And I have tried to be sensitive. It's just hard though once you have your kid and you finally have that joy, that, to then, hold back a little bit and just try to think like, where are people in there, even if you don't know, but like, what if it's sensitive for them? It's harder to do as your kid gets older, I think, because you just lose sight of it.
Totally.
But when he was just born, I remember I posted on Facebook like a long thing about like a kind of being open on social media. Like a lot of people who knew us that we were going through fertility stuff, but it was the first time I really announced it. It took us 3 years to get here, lots of fertility things, but we learned a lot along the way. We'd be so happy to share. So it was just like a big kind of coming out to the world with this, and like come to
Totally.
us if you need us.
Yeah.
But I also was like, I felt like I almost needed to put it in writing. I was like, I'm going to try my best. I'm a big sharer of photos. I'm a big like whatever, but I was like, I'm going to try not to share like newborn photos on this platform. Like if you want to see my kid, please reach out. I'm going to be so happy to send you photos like person to person or like in chats or whatever. But I remember another really triggering thing was just being bombarded in different groups and, WhatsApp groups and Facebook groups and whatever, where you're like, you don't have any control over it. You just open that platform and you just see all of these baby photos when you're in so much pain.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's hard to stick to that, but
Yeah.
tried my best to try to, not cause that pain. Once you're there, I guess you gain such a sensitivity to other people's, and now it's about holding on to it, but to other people's journeys that it's like something I never would have thought of before.
Right. I share my daughter a lot, and I feel like I wouldn't want people to hold back because it's joy. Like they're joyful, and I kind of want them to be able to express their joy. I just kind of controlled what I can control and just kind of clicked off when it was too much for me.
I also think it gives people a lot of hope when you share in whatever way, in person or in social media platforms, but when you share about your kid after having that whole journey, it's like a totally different thing, for whoever's going through it. Like I remember even in the thick of it, just being like, oh, like those are like the inspiring stories. Like I want to see that.
Totally. Yeah. I think it is, inspiring to other people, especially knowing, I mean, I was open with it throughout the whole 3 years. So people kind of feel like they went through it with me. And I remember when I announced my pregnancy, there was such a crazy just influx of people in like my DMs and everything, just like, oh my gosh, I'm so happy. Like it happened. It happened. And so, yeah.
For sure. Totally. Yeah. Like we had people who were like, praying for us for so many years and like really like had us in their top of mind and like would tell us like every day. They were just like such a crazy thing to think that someone has your like pain, they're holding it with you, they're rooting for you. And then the level of like, it really is like a miracle of like, wow, like my prayers were answered. Like this whole community was like rooting, and then it worked. Was like, I remember just when we said we were pregnant, and then also when our son was born, it really was like people were like, we're witnessing like a miracle. Like this is awesome. So for sure that the level of like communal joy is really special as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Nick's dad says it all the time. She's the miracle baby. So, and he's always like, yeah, because I didn't want to say anything, but usually your first transfer doesn't work. And I'm like, they told us that. They told us that going through fertility stuff, but she's our miracle baby.
For sure. And you guys are such a good kind of reminder to people that you really just need one. That people always say that.
Yes.
Other friends who've struggled with like quantity and like whatever, and it's like it's about quality. Like it's really hard to remember that, but you just need one to be the one.
And honestly, if anyone's listening and they're going through it right now, she wasn't the best quality either. She really wasn't. She was like the lowest grade I think they would allow to transfer. And she's a very, very healthy, I mean, knock on wood, a very, very healthy baby. So
Yeah.
yeah. Well, we've been going for quite some time. Do you have anything else you want to add to this episode? Maybe to people going through IVF or people in the religious community or anything like that?
Yeah, I guess something I told a friend recently was that I just remember my mom when I was going through all of this and I was like, why isn't this happening every month? It's so painful. She was like, just wait. Like, once you have your kid, that's the kid for you. And like, no other kid, like, you wouldn't want another child. Like, you'd want the one that you God, that perfect one that's so special, that's exactly the person that you need to be raising, who needs to be helping you grow as a person. And there's like, that was the timing, right? Like, kind of like when you meet your spouse, some people meet on the first date and other people have this whole long journey to find the right person. But once you find them, you're like, well, obviously all the things had to line up for this time and this day and this whatever. I don't want someone else. And so I, of course, now seeing my son for sure get that. And it's like, it doesn't make sense in the moment, like we were saying, but you just wait for your special little miracle at the right time. So hoping that whoever's going through it, listening to this, gets some hope and, stay strong and get some inspiration, hopefully, from our stories.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. This was great. Where can everyone find you?
Sure. Yeah. I am really old school. My siblings make fun of me, but I'm mostly still just on Facebook because I can't handle all the different competing platforms. So yeah, just my name. People want to message me, follow me, whatever. And then yeah, if anyone is interested in joining these WhatsApp groups that I mentioned, they can reach out to me as well. Happy to add.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Anna. This was great. Thank you to our listeners for listening to another episode of the Momming Around podcast. If you are new here, welcome to the podcast, like and subscribe. And if you are returning, thank you so much for returning, coming on this podcast to kind of bump us up in the ratings. It was so great to have you here this week, and we will see you next Thursday. Thank you.